What's up, guys? Spencer with the Fantasy Fanatics. I'm here with Nathan. How are you doing today, Nathan?
I'm doing good. I hope everybody enjoyed the first week of games. We're
Oh,
finally back in the regular season. It's awesome. How was your first week?
oh, loved it, loved it. Thursday was kind of like an appetizer, but Sunday, 1 o'clock through probably 11 o'clock. It
Yep.
was just great, and the Monday night game was awesome too.
The Monday night game was interesting. Just say hi to my cats. The Monday night was the Monday night game was interesting for sure. It went the other way to I think the way we both predicted. I don't think we saw the Raiders winning that one.
No, the Raiders
But
defense
yeah, I
looks.
thought it was encouraging.
The Raiders defense looked good too. They had a serious pass rush, much better improved than last year. I thought Lamar
Mm-hmm.
was going to run and pass all over that Raiders defense. I mean, he looked good, but not the Lamar Jackson I think we were all expecting against that Raiders defense. But we'll get into that.
Yeah,
We'll
I
get into that.
mean,
We'll get into that later.
yeah,
Um, but
it was a
some
good game.
things I want to go through is Raheem Mostert said today that he is out for the rest of the season. So
Yeah. Man
uh,
can't catch a break.
I know a lot of people have bidding free agency. I don't know what exactly to call it. But I would throw around 30, 35% because this is a season long waiver pickup. This isn't just like a pickup for 3 or 4 weeks. This is season long. Although I do see Trey Sermon eating into that.
And you're talking about Elijah Mitchell, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
I don't
but
know if I
there's
ever
Trey
said his name.
Sermon. There's also Jermichael Hasty. I don't know. Like it's gonna be like everybody's number one waiver this week because he had a good week one, but it could change easily.
I don't think there's a clear number two either.
You don't think so?
No, I don't. I don't think so.
Between Hasty and Sermon?
No, I mean there's not a near
Oh, a
clear number
second
two
waiver.
waiver.
Oh, okay.
I think it's a very week one on the waivers.
Maybe somebody like Sammy Watkins or Sterling Shepard. Somebody had a big week one, but those sort of players I don't expect to maintain that production.
Yeah, carry any season long value. No tight ends really. I mean, Gerald Everett's probably the best one. He didn't crack the top eight.
Cole
Um,
Kmet looked pretty good.
yeah, he did look good. I think I saw where he had
Shout out
like
Ryan. Shout out Ryan from the
yeah.
pod.
I think he said around 6, 7 targets is what Cole Kmet had. I don't know. We'll get into that later too. And I mean, Jawan Johnson, but he's not going to
Nah,
catch 2 touchdowns any week.
Adam Troutman's a tight end you want there. Jawan Johnson, he's trying to be what Ebron was a few years ago with Jack Doyle, like where he just caught all the touchdowns and Jack Doyle caught everything else. It's going to even out, and I think Adam Troutman's going to be the one you want.
And then quarterbacks, I mean, Tyrod Taylor and Jameis Winston, I think, are probably the only ones you want.
Out of those two, honestly, I prefer Tyrod.
Yeah. I think Jameis maintains, I don't know, I think a safer floor, but Tyrod has the bigger upside with the rushing.
Yeah, I agree. I think Tyrod's floor is going to be comparable to Jameis, to be honest, because of that rushing. I mean, if Brandon Cooks can play like prime Brandon Cooks, then who knows? Like he looked good.
I would
But
sell high
the
on
biggest question is the running backs.
I would sell high on Brandon Cooks right now.
I would not. I think he's going to keep that value. I think he's a usable player. If you're going to sell him, like make sure you get something good in return because he's going to produce this year. He's their only real weapon.
All right, so if someone offered you Brandon Ayuk for Brandon Cooks, what are you doing?
I'm keeping Cooks.
I think Ayuk is the better player this season.
I'm keeping Cooks.
What about Cortland Sutton for Brandon Cooks?
That's a little tougher. I think Sutton's better than Ayuk. Um,
I think
the thing is, like Sutton is because Judy's gone now, and so if Teddy is still competent, he's only got to compete with like Noah Fant because KJ Hamler I think is I don't know, he's nothing special. Yeah, I'd probably say Sutton.
okay, and one more. Corey Davis. He was going around the same spot as
Ooh,
Brandon
that's
Cooks.
tough. I think they are very similar players. I might go Corey Davis just because of the volume.
Okay.
But Corey Davis, Brandon Cooks, both of them are going to be great. I personally think they're low end like wide receiver twos right now.
Okay.
Pretty high on both.
I would say high end flex, low end wide receiver too.
Yeah.
But some other news is Rashad Penny's going to miss a few weeks. I don't think that's anything relevant. Jerry Jeudy 4 to 6 weeks. That just boosts, I think, all the pass catchers in that offense. I would say I value right now Tim Patrick higher than KJ Hamler. I love KJ Hamler too, but Tim Patrick looked better than him. I don't know. That could change next week. Ryan Fitzpatrick hit the IR today. Tyler, I don't think any of the pass catchers drop off that much. I didn't love Ryan Fitzpatrick going into the year. I don't think there's that big of a drop off for the pass catchers with Taylor Heineke in there. And
Dude, Heineke looked good. I thought he looked pretty good.
He looked good in the playoffs last year too.
Dude, he can run.
And then Michael Gallup hit the IR. I think that was over the weekend. So I think that's just a boost to everybody else in that offense too. Zeke.
I don't think it is.
Besides, I think
it's a plug and replace with Cedric Wilson.
I do not think Cedric Wilson will see anywhere near the targets Michael Gallup was. I think those were all good. I would have said, Gallup would have got 6 to 7 targets throughout the year.
Like on average, 6 to 7 targets. Why don't you see? I don't see a third receiver in that offense throwing the ball 60 times. Getting that?
I don't see Cedric.
That's only a 10% share.
I don't see Cedric Wilson getting 6 to 7 targets. I see him maybe with 3 to 4. So I'd say probably an extra target or two to CD Lamb, Zeke, and Amari Cooper.
And maybe the tight ends. Because
Dalton Schultz. Yeah, Dalton Schultz and Blake Jarwin.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Dallas. Dallas versus the Bucs, the season opener. The Bucs won with a late field goal, 31-29. Dak was 42 for 58 with 403 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. What a great bounce back game after what he went through this offseason. And then Tom Brady, breaking news, still Tom Brady. 32 for 50, 379 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks. If you had Dak and you got offered 1-for-1 Tom Brady, I saw somebody who asked this, would you rather have Tom Brady or Dak Prescott this year? I'm leaning towards Dak Prescott.
I would go Dak. I don't think it's much of a question. Tom Brady's going to put up great points every single week, pretty much, and a very high floor. But I think Dak's ceiling is higher, because the defense is worse, and also he adds value with his legs, and he's got comparable weapons. So, and Dak looked amazing. Like he looked like prime Dak. Like he never missed a game.
And he was facing a tough Tampa Bay defense.
Yep. So give me Dak, but Tom Brady is a great option this year as well.
Okay. And then Zeke was the second highest fantasy scorer in the Dallas backfield behind Tony Pollard. Zeke finished with 3.9. This is all standard. Everything I'll read today is standard, not PPR. Zeke had 3.9 fantasy points. Tony Pollard had 4.3. I'm not worried about Zeke. A lot of people are freaking out about him, I think, because it was in the spotlight. First game, you got to overreact to something, and a lot of people overreacted to Zeke and Ronald Jones. So I'm not worried about Zeke.
When you throw the ball 60 times, how many points is your running back going to get? Like it's as simple as that.
And we kind of knew this going into. We kind of knew this going into the game. Tampa Bay has a top 5 defensive line, amazing linebackers,
top 2,
and then I think top 5 linebacker core too. So
I think the whole defense is incredible, very deep, a lot of speed, and so I would expect him to struggle.
And then I see him bouncing back, against the Chargers this week too. That's another good defense, but I could see,
much easier though. Even though it's still like a decent defense, much easier.
Well, any defense is going to be a drop off. Any defense is going to be a drop off, basically.
But also, I think the game script will go a little better for him. I don't expect the Chargers to jump out to some kind of lead where they got to throw back into it. I expect the Cowboys to get up early in that one, and Zeke will get much more work.
And then Leonard Fournette finished with 5.9 fantasy points. Ronald Jones finished with negative 0.6. He fumbled, I think, in the second or third, and then they took him out for the rest of the game. Bruce Arians said today that Ronald Jones will be starting this week. I don't know how much that means, but I'm not freaking out about Ronald Jones.
He said that last week too.
I don't love either running back, I didn't love either running back going into the season. I had them as both borderline, probably top 30 running backs, maybe top 35. And I don't love them anymore leaving this matchup. There's just too many good pass catchers in the offense.
Yeah, I agree. It was for someone who, like, if you have Ronald Jones, it was definitely concerning to see him fumble once and then get yanked the rest of the game, and then watch Leonard Fournette dominate the touches. But I think it's going to be like this most of the year, where one game it's Leonard, one game it's Ronald Jones. It'll just go back and forth. I mean, they did it last year. That's just how it is.
Both flex plays, in my opinion. And then
let's go at best. Like I wouldn't even force them into your lineup.
And then let's go to the pass catchers for Dallas. Michael Gallup, as we just said, left the game. He is hitting the IR, so a minimum of 3 weeks for him. He did see 7 targets before he did get injured, though. And I just looked. Cedric Wilson did have 3. But Amari Cooper, 13 catches, 16 targets. And then CeeDee Lamb, 7 catches, 104 yards, and a touchdown with 15 targets. I don't expect them to get 16 and 15 targets, but I could both see them getting around 10 or 11 a game.
Yeah, and CD had how many drops?
I think they said 3.
Like officially 3, but like unofficially like 5. And so he could have very easily had an insane game. And that's against a great defense. Amari Cooper and CD are both wide receiver 1s right now. You're starting them every week regardless until one of them gets hurt or something like that. But I don't know which one I prefer. I may lean slightly towards CD just because he looks like he did all that on half the catches that Amari had.
Yeah, I don't really prefer one right now. I need to see a couple more weeks. I think Amari will get more. I think Amari's better in PPR, but I don't know in standard. I would probably lean towards Lamb. I need to see another game, though. If both are getting 16 targets, they're going to be top 10 wide receivers at this point.
Yeah, it helps when Dak throws, 58 times. So
those 2 wide receivers are so talented, though. And then off to the tight ends, Dalton Schultz, Blake Jarwin. Dalton Schultz had 6 catches for 45 yards on 6 targets. Blake Jarwin had 3 catches for 20 yards on 4 targets. I don't want to start either tight end, but if I had to start one, Dalton Schultz is the guy, I think.
I think so too, but like you said, I'd keep them both out of the lineup for now. Maybe wait until one of them has a great game and then trade him away for a tight end needy team. But I'm not looking to play them in my lineup. There's just too many mouths to feed there, and they're kind of at the bottom of the totem pole.
And for the people freaking out about Tony Pollard, I'm looking at it right now. He played 83%. Zeke played 83% of the snaps. Tony Pollard only played 24. So
that's right.
So, I mean, I'm not worried about Zeke at all. And let's go to the Tampa Bay pass catchers. Antonio Brown looked like prime Antonio Brown. Looked like him on the Steelers. 5 catches, 121 yards, 7 targets. Chris Godwin had 9 catches, 105 yards, and a touchdown on 14 targets. Gronk also looked like prime Gronk. 8 catches, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns on 8 targets. And then Mike Evans, 3 catches for 24 yards on 6 targets. If I had to rank the 3 wide receivers in that offense, I'm going Mike Evans. I think it's still what it was going on ADP. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, but that can interchange any week.
Yeah, it's kind of like I was saying last week. Is like they're all going to be much closer together in I think most people's rankings. In mine, I'll probably have Mike Evans still ranked first just because I think he's incredibly talented. And then I'll probably still have Antonio Brown ranked third, but they're going to be within 10 spots of each other, 15 spots of each other at the very most.
I think in my rankings this week, I will have Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown around that 25 mark, and then Mike Evans around that 20 to 19 mark. I think that's where I ranked them.
Yeah, I like that. They're all pretty close because you never know which one's gonna have the good game.
And then off to the number 1 overall pick, Jacksonville versus Houston. Jacksonville losing 21-37. I mean, who expected? I mean, 2 bad teams, but Houston's definitely probably the worst team in the league. But Trevor Lawrence Looked so in his first game. 332 yards, 3 touchdowns, but 3 picks. Finished him with 19 fantasy points. And then Tyrod Taylor with 291 yards, 2 touchdowns, 23 fantasy points, and he also got 40 yards on the ground. Looked like Tyrod Taylor. I mean, if Tyrod Taylor's a starter, he's a viable quarterback.
He's always a good fill-in quarterback. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, if you have somebody go down or something, I mean, I think he's a good bench stats for this week.
Yeah, he's a good one to have if you're playing matchups because he's always going to have that kind of solid floor. And yeah, I just thought he looked good in general. Looked like he, was dodging the golf tees in the locker room, but I thought he did pretty well.
And then off to the running backs. I want to talk about this for a little bit. This is probably the player I'm worried most about in fantasy.
Okay.
James Robinson had 5 carries, 25 yards, finished with 5.4 fantasy points. Carlos Hyde finished with 9 carries for 44 yards with 5.8 fantasy points. James Robinson played 64% of the snaps. Carlos Hyde played 34. That's encouraging, but I did a little bit of research on this. James Robinson, if you had to guess, where do you think he finished in yards per carry last year?
I would say it was probably around 4.
24th.
No, I'm saying like 4 yards per carry.
Yeah. I think it was 4.3 or 4.4. But he finished 24th in yards per carry. Those are people who have a minimum of 100 carries. And he played I think it was week 6 to 13 or 14 when he was fully healthy. He played 80% of the snaps. If James Robinson stays around that 65% snap percentage, and Trevor Lawrence is throwing it this much because
he won't.
Where do you think he goes?
I think he'll be closer, at least above 70, 75, because Carlos Hyde got all the touches in garbage time when it was clearly over. So it's going to skew that. But James Robinson is going to be fine.
I do not think James Robinson will be fine. I have him as fine. I think he's an RB2. And I was going to ask you this: who do you prefer season long, David Montgomery or James Robinson? Look at here's the poll right here that we have going on. I did not expect it to turn out like this.
Well, I did because it's week 1. It's overreaction week 1, and Montgomery looked good and Robinson looked bad. But
I was going to put 2 running backs up there. I think I was going to put. I'd have to look. I think I was. Let me look real quick at the running back.
I'm going to go against the grain. Give me James Robinson.
I think I was going to put Clyde Edwards-Helaire or James Robinson. There, I would go James Robinson.
I think I'll still take Robinson over Montgomery. That might be a hot take just because of week 1. I think week 1's a fluke. I really do. I think it's a fluke. Everybody's going to be overreacting. And you can go ahead and clip this for when James Robinson has like 40 points next week.
I just don't see that kind of. I mean, he got fed last year. He was playing at points 90% of the snaps. And Carlos Hyde is kind of the bigger guy. And I think he'll be the goal line back for Jacksonville too.
I don't think so.
I think he will because he's the bigger guy. Carlos Hyde has been a pest for the past 3 or 4 years wherever he's gone.
Yeah.
That's just what he does. Sorry to Carlos Hyde if he's watching this. Highly
doubt they play Denver this next week too. So James Robinson may have another semi-quiet game because it's Denver. That's a great defense. I think he's a great buy low candidate. I think he's absolutely.
I think for the rest of the season, I have him around a mid RB2.
Yeah, right now he's RB2.
It just worries me because Jacksonville couldn't pass last year because they had Gardner Minshew, who stunk. And I mean, who was his biggest competition for targeting? Competition for snaps? I think it was Ogumawale. I don't even have to say his name.
You're talking about Ogumawale?
There you go.
Well, hold on. What was his name? For a while, it was the old Washington receiving back,
Chris Thompson.
Chris Thompson, yes. Yeah.
And actually, look, James Robinson, the first 5 or 6 weeks, was playing 60% of snaps when Chris Thompson was there.
Well, he
But that's a whole different.
on Sunday. He was the receiving back. Like he got all the receiving back snaps.
He caught 5 balls. So,
I'm telling you, be patient with James Robinson.
I'm just a little worried about him. I'm a little worried about that. I think most people drafted him around that running back 13 or 14 mark after Travis Etienne went down. Just a little worried about him maintaining that ADP.
I think it'll be fine.
Off to the running backs. Mark Ingram got fed this week.
He did.
He ended up with 85 yards and a touchdown. He was not efficient, though. For getting fed 26 times, his longest run was 11 yards, and he averaged 3 yards per carry. I have him as a waiver wire target. That's just because there are no other guys to grab. For the rest of the season, I'll probably go Phillip Lindsay, Mark Ingram, David Johnson.
Okay. I have no idea how to predict this because nobody saw Mark Ingram being the lead running back week 1. I think he was third on everybody's projections in that backfield.
I even thought maybe he would get cut.
Maybe it'll be a hot hand kind of thing where whoever just got it going gets the ball. I mean, David Johnson and Phillip Lindsay both scored a touchdown, so it's like, what the heck? It's kind of wild.
Yeah, and Mark Ingram played 46% of the snaps. David Johnson played 28, and Phillip Lindsay played 26. I would see that more around everybody being around 30% next week. But off to the
wait and see.
Yeah, off to the receivers. DJ Chark led Jacksonville with 3 catches for 86 yards and a touchdown. Marvin Jones had 5 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown. Laviska Shenault had 7 catches for 50 yards. DJ Chark led the wide receivers with 12 targets. The rest had 9. I still lean Shenault over Chark, but mine goes Shenault, Chark, Marvin Jones.
I think seeing Chark healthy like that and getting fed has put Chark at number 1 for me. I think it was Chark, Shenault, then Jones. I think all 3 are viable options, though. I think you can start all 3. I think at minimum flex. And then Chark's like right on that border of being like a wide receiver too.
Okay, and then off to Houston. I think there's only one real pass catcher in this offense that is worth even having on your roster. Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks for 5 catches for 132 yards and 7 targets. I would expect to see more targets. That was a positive game script for them, which won't happen too often.
Right.
So I would see more.
Brandon Cooks looked good. He looked like old Brandon Cooks, whether he was on the Saints or the Patriots or whoever. I mean, he looked quick. He was making great contested grabs. And Tyrod likes to look for him because, like you said, it's the only real receiving threat. So I think he's a low-end wide receiver too right now and for the rest of the season.
All right, and off to the Steelers versus the Bills, where the Steelers beat the Bills. I hate it. Bills are my favorite team. But Ben Roethlisberger threw for 188. I said the Bills versus Steelers. I was just talking about how I was mad that the Bills lost.
Did you say win that game?
All right, off to Ben Roethlisberger, 188 yards and a touchdown. I don't know if it was the Bills' defense or if Ben Roethlisberger kind of did what he did last year, just dumping off and then just the occasional 20-yard pass. I did not love Ben Roethlisberger. Like we were saying, I think we had him around QB 20 going into the season. I'd move him a little bit down. But he has weapons, though. And then Josh Allen, an underwhelming game, 270 yards and a touchdown. He did carry the ball 9 times for 44 yards. Finished him with 17 points. That is not the quarterback you drafted 2nd overall, but I expect him to right the ship versus Miami. Spoiler alert, he is my QB1 this week. You can sit here, yell at me all you want, but I think Josh Allen averages like 3.5 touchdowns versus the Dolphins in his career. I think he has 3 player of the weeks against him in like 5 or 6 tries too. And he just knows the Dolphins number.
Okay. I think Josh Allen is definitely another one just to have patience with. He's playing arguably the best defense in the league in Pittsburgh, and it's Josh Allen. He's going to throw the ball every time. He's their goal line back. It's like, what's not to like? He's going to be fine.
And then Najee Harris, Dude, this is crazy. 100% of the snaps. 16 carries for 45 yards. The snap percentage did not carry over onto the field with production, but if he's getting 100% of snaps or 90+ percentage of snaps, this dude's I have him as RB6, I think, this week.
Okay.
I mean, Najee Harris, he'll be a top 10 running back if he's playing that many snaps.
I think he's certainly inside the top 10 playing that much. I don't know. I haven't done my rankings yet, but he'll be inside my top 10 for sure. There's not really any competition, and he should get more touches.
I think he should be around the 20 to 23 or 4 mark because he is a big guy. He's not some 5'7", 170 pounder who's going to get hurt.
Was that a shot at Tariq Cohen?
That was a shot at Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary played well, though. 11 carries for 72 yards. He averaged 6.5 yards per carry, and with Zach Moss being a surprise inactive, it looks like Devin Singletary might be that guy in this backfield. I still think he's a flex play at best because of the lack of volume.
I agree. And then Matt Breida played some as well, but I think everybody was surprised with Zach Moss being scratched. But yeah, like you said, Devin Singletary's, I don't know, maybe flex. I prefer starting somebody else because they throw so much. And he's not
the only reason I have him in the flex play is because I think he will get more passing game work. That Steelers defense was just insane, and Josh Allen couldn't really throw it to Devin Singletary. But off to the Steelers pass catchers, Juju, 4 catches, 100 yards, 52 yards with 8 targets. Chase Claypool, 3 catches for 45 yards, 5 targets, and Deontay Johnson, 5 catches, 36 yards, and touchdown with 10 targets. If I had to rank him right now, I'd still rank him probably Deontay Johnson, and then I'd say Chase Claypool and Juju are kind of interchangeable.
But I would say Claypool is the third option, and then Deontay Johnson and Juju, I think, are going to be 1A, 1B. I think the only reason that you're still saying that is because Deontay Johnson had that touchdown. Otherwise, you'd probably be saying it was like a.
I love Deontay Johnson going into this year. I think Deontay Johnson will be the clear number 1 throughout the year.
Okay. I mean, he's going to get plenty of work. You were comparing him to Antonio Brown earlier, or in a previous episode, which was a little.
No. I compared his route running to Antonio Brown's. I said,
which is a little crazy.
No, the best route runner. I mean, he's the best route runner since Antonio Brown for the Steelers.
Well, yeah, he came in like the year after.
Well, he's the closest thing. I'd say he's a top 10 route runner in the NFL.
Yeah, I don't know about that one, but he does well. He's going to get plenty of targets, so I'd say wide receiver 2.
And PPR, I'd say high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1. In standard, I'd say wide receiver 2.
Ain't no wide receiver 1. That's crazy. That is crazy.
I think he has potential to be.
Wide receiver 1 now.
In PPR, he was going right after Amari Cooper.
Okay, but people were drafting. Who knows? Like, it's a completely different draft thought after week 1. I mean, people were drafting Trey Sermon. I don't think Trey Sermon would be drafted right now. So it's
I still have faith in Trey Sermon, but we'll get to that later. But then Stephon Diggs had an underwhelming game. 9 catches, 69 yards. That's an underwhelming game for him. I mean, that's kind of crazy. 14 targets though. Then Cole Beasley, 8 catches for 60 yards, 13 targets. I don't think people outside of Buffalo were expecting that. I don't think I was expecting 13 targets. Then Emmanuel Sanders had 8 targets, 4 catches for 52. My guy Gabriel Davis had 40 yards and a touchdown. The only wide receiver you could start in that offense is clearly Stephon Diggs. I do think Gabriel Davis is worth a stash in 12-team leagues. That might be my bias, but I think he's really good. But in PPR leagues, Cole Beasley might be a sneaky flex play.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a solid flex play, and then Gabe Davis is just a stash, and Stephon's only 1 year league starting every week. I think you're pretty right there.
And then Eagles versus the Falcons. Eagles blew the Falcons out. Jalen Hurts had a nice game, 264 yards, 3 touchdowns, 62 rushing yards, 28 fantasy points. And then Matt Ryan just did not look great. 164 yards with 7.3 fantasy points. Miles Sanders looked good, 74 yards, no touchdowns. And then Mike Davis did not look great. He averaged 3.3 yards per carry on 15 carries with 7.2 fantasy points. Are you a little discouraged by Mike Davis?
No, it's kind of what I expected. And also that you mentioned earlier that the Texans are the worst team in the league. I would say after week 1, it's the Falcons, and like by a long shot, by some
Really?
margin. Oh yeah, I mean, did you watch much of the game? I had Kyle Pitts in a lot of my leagues, so I watched the
I did
Falcons
not.
game.
I did
That
not watch
offensive
much of the
line,
game.
I think I could walk into that offensive line right now. It was Matt Ryan had no time to throw. People may throw shade at Matt Ryan for being bad with it, but he had no time. And so, Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts, like their opportunity was limited. If they can get the line figured out, then that team will be fine. But it was rough to watch.
And then Eagles receivers, Devontae Smith had 6 catches for 71 yards and a touchdown on 8 targets. Jalen Rager had 6 catches for 49 yards with 10.9 fantasy points. I don't think you could start any Philadelphia wide receiver at this point. I think Devontae Smith might be the closest one, but I don't think any of them are startable.
I think Devonta Smith is. I think he's a good flex play. I think he's got wide receiver 2 upside, especially with his connection with Jalen Hurts. I like him. I think he looked good. And if Jalen Hurts can keep playing like that, I know it was against the Falcons, but if they can keep playing like that, Smith, I think Smith is very startable. I think in 10, 12 or 12 team league, I'd say he's a solid flex.
And then Dallas Goedert showed us why he's tight end 1 in Philadelphia. 4 catches for 42 yards and a touchdown compared to Zach Ertz's 2 catches for 34 yards. Not a great game by Dallas Goedert, but he got a touchdown. That's all you can ask for out of a tight end that's not named Kyle Pitts or not named Darren Waller, Travis Kelce, or George Kittle.
Yeah, I agree. He was a lot of people are talking about is Ertz going to get back, which he was still involved, but I still think it's Goddard's show. I think he's the clear number 1 right now.
And then Calvin Ridley had 8 targets. I think he had like 3 or 4 in the first quarter. Kind of slowed down. 5 catches for 51 yards, 5.1 fantasy points. Kyle Pitts had 4 catches for 31 yards, 3.1 fantasy points. Also had 8 targets. And then the only notable one in that offense is Hayden Hurst with 2.8 fantasy points. I'm encouraged to see Kyle Pitts getting 8 targets. Not encouraged to see Calvin Ridley end up with 5 catches.
Yeah, I mean, I think Pitts and Ridley were tied for the lead in targets, which is an encouraging sign. And I expect both of those numbers to go up throughout the season because I hope they'll get better.
All right, and off to the Jets versus Carolina. Zach Wilson had a nice debut, 258 yards, 2 touchdowns, interception. I don't know if I'd say nice, but he had a viable debut. 18.3 fantasy points. And then Sam Darnold finished with 19 fantasy points, 279 yards, and a touchdown off to the running backs. All of them finished with 2.6 fantasy points or lower. Tevin Coleman had 2.4. Todd Johnson had 2.6. Michael Carter had 2.0. Snap count went 54% Todd Johnson, 26% Tevin Coleman, 25% Michael Carter. If you have any of those running backs, stay away. Keep them on your bench. The only ones I think is worth rostering is Michael Carter. I have a lot of Michael Carter shares. I am, if he does this next week, I think he's droppable. Just stay a little patient on Michael Carter.
Yeah. He's just a stash at this point. You're hoping that he somehow breaks out, but I don't think
he did not look great.
Yeah.
But Christian McCaffrey, still Christian McCaffrey, 18.7 fantasy points, 21 carries for 98 yards. He saw 89% of snaps. He also hauled in 9 catches for 89 yards. So Christian McCaffrey, just a beast. To the Jets pass catchers, we got Corey Davis with 5 catches, 97 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7 targets. That's the only fantasy relevant player as a receiver, I think, for the Jets. You said you think he's a wide receiver too. He finished 21.7 fantasy points.
Yeah, I agree. I think wide receiver 2 is Zach Wilson's favorite target. And Zach Wilson looks good. He's not going to have much help. The running backs aren't going to be much help. I think it's going to be him throwing to Corey Davis most all games, but it's just going to be. I think it's going to be a question mark if Corey Davis can hold up the whole season.
And then Elijah Moore had negative 0.3 fantasy points. Obviously, preseason hype was not converted into production for him. And then DJ Moore had 8 targets, 9.4 fantasy points. Robbie Anderson only had 3 targets, but made that a touchdown with 11.7 fantasy points. And then Terrace Marshall with 6 targets and 26 yards.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it clearly is DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Terrace Marshall. I think Terrace Marshall could overtake Robbie Anderson at some point, though.
I think it's that order you just mentioned until further notice. I think DJ Moore's the clear number 1, Anderson 2, then Marshall 3.
All right, and off to the Chargers versus Washington. I had Cincinnati on here. I don't know why. But Justin Herbert finished with 13.3 fantasy points. Taylor Heineke finished with 10.5. Ryan Fitzpatrick only threw 6 passes before leaving. He's hitting the IR. We talked about that. Austin Eckler finished with 11.7 fantasy points with no targets. That's a little cause for concern, I think.
He'll be fine. I think it's just like James Robinson. Don't overreact week 1. He is getting eased into it. He had the hammy injury. He'll be fine. He's a stud.
Do you expect him to see more than 58% of the targets, though? I mean, 58% of snaps?
Yes. Yeah, they played like 4 running backs.
I expect him to be around that 65 to 70 mark.
I agree. I think he's too good to be rotating in like Ogletree
and somebody's snap count who I can see improving is Antonio Gibson. He had 65% of snaps, had 8.8 fantasy points. J.D. McKissick did not look great either. So,
yeah,
and J.D. McKissick was the big pass catcher, and he only had 1 target with no catches.
Yeah, I mean, the preseason hype on Gibson turning into that 3-down back role, I mean, so far has lived up to it. He had, 25 touches? Is that correct? 25 touches?
I see.
I think he had 20 carries and 5 catches. Is that right?
20 carries and 3 catches, so 23.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I take that every single game.
And then Keenan Allen had 10 fantasy points. Mike Williams had 14.2. Jared Cook had 5.6. Keenan Allen had 13 targets. Mike Williams had 12. Jared Cook had 8. My big takeaway is Mike Williams might be a flex play as Justin Herbert's, number 2 option.
Yeah, his biggest problem for the past couple of years has just been health. Because when he's on the field, he makes these crazy catches. He'll sacrifice his body to go get the ball, and he's got all the talent in the world. And Herbert likes to throw to him, so I think he's a very good flex play.
And I think Jared Cook might be a sneaky waiver wire target. He had 8 targets. I mean, he might be 35 years old, but he looked like he was getting it done for the Chargers.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, they don't really have too many other options.
Yeah, Terry McLaurin had 4 targets, a little underwhelming, but he caught all of them for 6.2 fantasy points. Logan Thomas had 3 targets. He caught all of them for 9 fantasy points. And a lot of people had Dewami Brown as kind of a sneaky number 2 behind Curtis Samuel before he got hurt, or after he got hurt. I think I was a little high on Dewami Brown, but he finished with negative yardage. So obviously not encouraging.
Yeah, I think he's irrelevant. I don't think you got to worry about him too much. And then when Curtis Samuel comes back, he's 100% out of the picture.
I think he's a good dynasty. I think
McLaurin and Samuel are young.
Yeah, but I think Dewami Brown could be better than Curtis Samuel. I think he was a second or third. I think it was a second or third round pick. Dewami Brown was really good at UNC. He was Sam Howell's number 1 go-to. But Russell Wilson, your favorite team, Seattle Seahawks, he looked good. 254 yards, 4 touchdowns, 27 fantasy points. Carson Wentz had 251 yards, 2 touchdowns. He looked like he was getting pressured from a bad Seahawks defense, in my opinion.
Wow.
I don't think
I think they disproved that narrative.
I think that narrative will go right back to where it will this week. That was
playing the Titans.
I mean, they did. I mean,
you saw what Arizona did.
Old buddy on left tackle, Teddy Lewan, did say Chandler Jones made him look dumb. So
yeah. It didn't
and then
matter who it is. 5 sacks, you're looking pretty dumb.
Chris Carson had 78% of snaps. I can only see that going up with Rashad Penny being hurt. I could see him around the 80 to 85. Probably a top 5 in snap percentage. He looked good, though. 16 carries, 91 yards. Did not fall into the end zone. And then Jonathan Taylor had 17 carries for 56 yards. They just looked, Indianapolis just looked overwhelmed with Seattle's defense. But Jonathan Taylor only played 55% snap.
Yep.
So,
they just signed Naheem Hines for a reason. Like, they're not going to give him that contract if he's just going to sit.
When you were drafting Jonathan Taylor inside the top 8, this is not what you were expecting, I don't think.
Yeah, but it was a negative game script, and they're going to be fine. I think that's another one like Robinson and Eckler. He's going to be fine.
Jonathan Taylor did lead the Colts in pass catching, though.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then Seattle, it was a Tyler Lockett game, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then DK Metcalf, 60 yards and a touchdown. With 5, both of them had 5 targets. Like we said, Gerald Everett, 2 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown with 2 targets. I would like to see a little bit more from Gerald Everett target wise, but I still think he's a fine waiver add in 12 or deeper leagues.
Yeah, if you're kind of tight end needy in any given week, he's one you can plug in and hopefully he falls in the end zone. But he was sharing too much time with Will Disley for my liking to be able to plug and play him every single week. I think it's just like it's like the deeper tight ends it's kind of like a lottery. Like, you don't know what you're going to get.
Okay, and then Arizona versus Tennessee. Arizona blew him out of the water. Kyler Murray looked like an MVP, 289 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick, 33 fantasy points. That's only with 20 yards rushing. He did have a rushing touchdown. And then Ryan Tannehill finished with 14.1 fantasy points. Chase Edmonds played 58% of the snaps with 10.6 fantasy points. James Conner played 49% of the snaps, 5.3 fantasy points. James Conner had 16 carries on almost half of the snaps. That is not what I was expecting.
Well, they didn't bring him in from Pittsburgh for no reason. Like, they're not going to bring him in and then just sit him. And he's a great power back. He's just like, I think he's pretty much limited to short yardage and goal line. If the game script was the other way around, like if Tennessee was up, I don't think you would have seen very much of James Conner. It would have been like even more the Chase Edmonds show.
And then Derrick Henry, speaking of great power backs, had 17 carries for 58 yards. How many percent of snaps do you think he played?
I didn't
this has to do with the negative
game.
This has to do with the negative game script, but still.
I would imagine the 80s.
62.
62, wow. So who played? Jeremy McNichols?
Played 36% of snaps.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
That is 33 too many. And then off to the pass. D-Hop, wide receiver 1, 2 touchdowns, 83 yards. Christian Kirk had a nice day, 19 fantasy points, 5 catches for 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I put him in the waiver wire target. I have him. I think it's Kirk. Shepard, Watkins is the wide receiver waiver wire targets.
Okay.
That's the order I have them. And then Rondale Moore even looked good with 68 yards. AJ Green had 6 targets. Did not look good, though. Only with 2 catches at 25 yards.
Yeah, it's his first game, and they've got tons of weapons there. If he can get anywhere
don't do that. You hated Latavius Murray last night in his first game for the team. Oh, don't give AJ Green the treatment. I know you're a big AJ Green fan.
Is competing with like five other receivers. Latavius Murray got beat out by an undrafted free agent.
I think Latavius Murray might even be an undrafted free agent.
Is he?
Let's see. How old is Latavius Murray? A little off script.
Yeah. A little audible.
6th round. So almost undrafted. Certainly was not first or second round pick. But I think AJ Green is irrelevant in fantasy. If you're in a 10 or 12 team league, I think you can.
Irrelevant? Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So, and then Tennessee receivers, A.J. Brown had 10.9 fantasy points. Julio Jones only had 29 yards on 6 targets. Expect a big bounce back game, though, from Julio Jones. Buy low. Buy low. And then San Francisco versus Detroit. Yeah, on Julio.
Yeah, I agree.
And then San Francisco versus Detroit. San Francisco had a big lead. I think they at one point had a 24-point. I don't know. I'm not even going to guess. But had a big lead, blew it, and then ended up winning. Jimmy Garoppolo, 314 yards and a touchdown. Trey Lance even got in the game through one pass and threw a touchdown. Carried the ball 3 times. But Elijah Mitchell, number one waiver wire target, 64% of snaps, 19 carries, 104 yards, and a touchdown. So Elijah Mitchell is the guy, I think. But I think we could see more Trey Sermon than people are thinking.
And don't count out JaMychal Hasty, and then when Jeff Wilson comes back. So
Kyle Shanahan has been known to ride the hot hand.
Yeah. Yeah. It could change week to week. So,
and then DeAndre Swift, 11 carries, 39 yards. That's not where he got most of his work, though. Got most of his work in receiving, where he had 8 catches for 65 yards and a touchdown. I was not expecting DeAndre Swift to play 68% of snaps. I had him more around that 55-50 range with the injury. But if we're seeing a lot of DeAndre Swift like this, that's an RB1.
It is, but Jamal Williams, had a great game. I don't think Swift's an RB1. I would say he's an RB2 as long as he can stay healthy. But I think Williams is at the minimum flex play as well. Like I think they both have a purpose.
Okay. And then off to receivers. I don't think any receivers besides TJ Hockenson for the Lions are worthy to talk about.
Agreed.
8 catches for 97 yards and a touchdown. That's who you drafted when you're drafted tight end 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Sometimes going to 6. I don't know why he was going so far behind George Kittle.
Yeah, I think right now he's my clear number 4.
Yeah, I have him above. I have him above Pitts and Andrews, I think, this week. So I love TJ Hockenson.
Me as well.
And then speaking of George Kittle, had 4 catches for 78 yards. And then Deebo Samuel, 9 catches for 189 yards and 12 targets and a touchdown. 22.9 fantasy points. And Brandon Ayuk was only a punt returner this game. So
weird.
I mean, he even saw the field as a receiver, but he only touched the ball as a punt returner. I'm freaking out if I'm Brandon Ayuk owner. I'm in a league, a 12-team league where somebody dropped him. I don't know if that's because they hate Brandon Ayuk after this week, but I mean, I think he's a buy low. I think he's the best buy low value right now.
Yeah, you should be able to get him for dirt cheap, and I think it's purely because of the injury stuff. People were saying, "Oh, but he returned punts." Yeah, but it didn't make sense. Why would you throw him out there? Like, why wouldn't you have him out there as a receiver as well? He's way too talented. I think he's gonna be fine.
And then Deebo Samuel going forward, I see him as a low end wide receiver too until he can prove it this week. I think I have him ranked 21 or 22.
Yeah,
I think I saw where ESPN had him ranked at 19.
it's a little high for me, I think, because I think Ayuk will bounce back.
But if Deebo Samuel is seeing 8-9 targets a game, he's so talented. Both of them are though. So
I don't see that continuing.
And then the last 1:00 game, Cincinnati versus Minnesota. Kirk Cousins had a nice game, 351 yards and 2 touchdowns. Joe Burrow had 18.6 fantasy points, 261 yards and 2 interceptions. Nice bounce back game from him. Dalvin Cook was a little underwhelming, but he did fall into the end zone with 14.4 fantasy points. Then Joe Mixon had 29 carries, 127 yards at touchdown, 21 fantasy points, and 78% of snaps. So Joe Mixon, Also, like I said, is probably from here on out a top 12 play for me.
Yeah. He'll have those occasional games where he's very frustrating. He has like a 3 or 4 point week, but I think overall he's going to be fine. He'll probably be inside my top 15 most weeks. There's a lot of good guys at the top. He had 29 carries though. It wasn't the most efficient running in the world, but with that kind of volume, like who cares?
They even had 4 catches too.
Yeah.
So he had 33 touches. Adam Thielen led Minnesota in targets. He had 9 catches for 92 yards with 2 touchdowns. KJ Osborne had 7 catches for 76 yards. And Justin Jefferson had 5 catches for 71 yards. I don't think KJ Osborne has any value, but he was tied for second in targets.
Yeah, he didn't have any value, and I expect Jefferson to pass Thielen. Thielen to have these games because he's got a good connection with Cousins, but I expect Jefferson to be like the clear number 1 for the rest of the season.
And then Jamar Chase had a great debut, kind of shut everybody up about that whole dropping thing. 15.9 fantasy points. T. Higgins had 11.8 fantasy points, and Tyler Boyd had 3.5 fantasy points, or 3.2. So I think it definitely goes Jamar Chase. Or no, I would say T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and then Tyler Boyd.
Yeah.
I'm not falling too much for the Jamar Chase wide receiver 1 hype.
He's got that upside though, for sure.
Oh, yeah. He's a great – I mean, that's why they drafted him 5th overall. He's great. Denver versus the Giants. Teddy B looked good. 20 fantasy points. Daniel Jones also looked good. 21 fantasy points. Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams split the snap count right down the middle. Both had 50%. Melvin Gordon made the most of his with a 70-yard touchdown run, though. Ended up with 17.8 fantasy points. Javonte Williams only had 4.1. And then Saquon Barkley played 48% of the snaps with 2.7 fantasy points. I am absolutely freaking out if I have Saquon.
I'm not. I'm buying low. If you have him, hold him.
I would like to see your facial reaction when I tell you this, but I have Saquon as my RB28 this week.
Yeah, I saw you texting me that earlier. I understand. They play Thursday, don't they? Against
they play quick turnaround, Washington. Tough defense. Whew. I
think he's still going to get eased into it, but he'll be fine.
Do you remember last year when he played those where he played against the Steelers week 1 and then played some of week 2? I don't know if it's the scheme that Joe Judge is running or something, but he or Jason Garrett, he did not look good.
Yeah.
In those 2 games, didn't look near the explosiveness he had. I don't know if he's running behind a bad offensive line. I don't know if they're stacking the box. I don't know if it's just, what the coaches are doing with him. But I'm hitting the panic button if I have Saquon.
I'm not. It's week 1. So week 1.
I'm not trading him because, you're never going to –
you're not going to recoup your first-round pick value.
Yeah. So I expect –
Get calm, though. He'll be fine.
I expect Saquon to have another down week this week until he proves he has that explosiveness.
Well, I think he's still getting eased in. Like, I think this week's going to be another down week, like you said. I think being ranked in the 20s is appropriate. But then week 3, they'll have an extra long week because they played on this Thursday. And I think he'll come out firing week 3.
I would consider sitting him versus the against the football team.
What was that? Unbelievable. There's no place in football.
But would you consider benching him?
You can't. There's no way you have 3 better options than Saquon.
No. I'm talking about the Giants benching him.
Oh, the Giants benching him. Oh, no. It's Saquon Barkley. You can't. If you bench him, so? The fan base will, throw pitchforks.
I have Saquon Barkley in one league.
Me as well.
I am not starting him.
Really? I'm starting him because of Saquon Barkley.
But, Saquon Barkley hasn't looked good in 2 years.
It's 1 week, though. Don't compare him to last year. He'll be fine.
I am starting Joe Mixon. I'm even starting Elijah Mitchell over him, and then I have T. Higgins in the flex in that 12-team league. So, and the only reason I have Saquon in that league is because I auto drafted the first 2 rounds because I was at another draft. Nobody told me what time it was at. Totally forgot.
Yeah.
But Saquon Barkley is going to be outside my top 20 until he proves he can, produce a top 20 fantasy running back week.
Okay.
I mean, do you expect anything out of him this Thursday?
Not really this week. I think he'll be under 10 points unless he falls into the end zone. But after that, he'll be inside my top 15 after that.
I think even if he does fall in the end zone, he might still be under 10 fantasy points.
He'll be all right. He'll be fine.
But Jerry Jeudy, going to miss 4 to 6 weeks with an injury. He looked good too before that. I'm not a doctor, but the high ankle sprain, I have seen people saying that can be tough on the route running. They say in 4 to 6 weeks. I would probably give it 6 to 8 to get him fully healthy so he can return to that insane route runner that he is and make the cuts that he needs to. But you're holding on to Jerry Jeudy if you have him.
Yeah, I think you are, unless you're in a league where you are restricted as to how many receivers you can hold because you don't want to have too many that are injured. Limit your options. But yeah, in most leagues, if you've got an IR spot, plop him down there. If not, just keep him at the end of your bench. He'll be fine.
And then Noah Fant led the team in targets, 8 targets, converted into 6 catches, 62 yards. He's a low-end tight end one. Nothing exciting. I think he's just gonna produce every week.
Yeah,
I mean, he'll occasionally catch a touchdown, but I could see 5 catches for 60 yards being his normal.
Yeah, I agree.
So he's kind of the most mediocre. Not mediocre.
But mediocre is fine for tight ends because it's a very shallow position.
And then Sterling Shepard, 7 catches, 113 yards. A lot of people love him on the waivers as the number 2. We've seen Sterling Shepard long enough to know that he is not, an alpha male in that wide receiver room.
Yeah.
I have him as my number 2 waiver, I think, this week, or number 3 behind Christian Kirk. I can't remember. Only because this week is so shallow with waiver targets. But Sterling Shepard, 17.3 fantasy points. Darius Slayton, 6.5. And Kenny Galladay was 6.4. I don't love any Saints pass catcher. I have Kenny Galladay in our league, and I'm bitching.
You mean Giants pass catcher?
What did I say?
Saints.
I said Saints?
Yeah.
I don't know why I said that. Was like the Chicago Bills.
Nah, yeah, I'm. If there's one, it's got to be Galladay, but I'm. Good Lord, hold on.
If you do not turn your ringer off.
Oh my gosh, I'm getting blown up by people at work.
Off to the Packers versus the Saints. 133 yards and 2 interceptions for Aaron Rodgers, finishing with 1 fantasy point. Certainly not the game you were looking for when you drafted Aaron Rodgers as a QB1. We even saw some Jordan Love, but Jameis Winston had one of the weirdest stat lines I've ever seen. 148 yards and 5 touchdowns, 29 fantasy points. And then, Green Bay's running backs didn't do anything either. 2 fantasy points for Aaron Jones, 2.6 for A.J. Dillon. Then Alvin Kamara, 15.1 fantasy points. He looked good.
Yeah. Kind of what you expected from Kamara, but I was not expecting 5 tutties from Jameis. That's kind of wild. I don't think that sticks around.
If you would have told me that Jameis Winston had 29 fantasy points and Marquez Callaway had 1 catch, I would have thought you were stupid. But
if Jameis looks like this with Michael Thomas back, Jameis could be in that QB1 conversation, I think.
Yeah. But he was kind of spreading it all around. It wasn't towards, they don't have that one big receiver, but he was kind of spreading it around. Adam Troutman led targets with 6. I think that's the tight end you want. I think we talked about that already.
Agreed.
And then Devontae Adams, 5 catches for 56 yards. Certainly underwhelming for the wide receiver.
Probably be his worst game of the season.
You think so?
Yeah. I mean, last year he had one of the highest floors I'd ever seen for a receiver. It was incredible. So, yeah. And
then Miami versus New England. Tua had 16.1 fantasy points. Mac Jones had 15.2 in his debut. Myles Gaskin had 54% of the snaps with 7.6 fantasy points. Malcolm Brown had 30%. Savon Ahmed had 20. Damian Harris had 53% of snaps. I have a star right next to him for a reason. He fumbled in that game, late in that game. And I don't remember who came out, but they said they expected, his workload to be slowed down because of that fumble. I mean, 53% of snaps.
There's a coach that came out today saying they expect him to bounce back and do even better. He's had a good game.
I don't think he's going to get better than 20 carries for 100 yards.
That's what I'm saying. He had a good game. Like, I think he's going to be fine. Don't let that one fumble,
53% of snaps is not great, though.
Yeah, but when he's in there, they're giving him the ball.
I only see James White and Ramondre Stevenson get more involved, though.
I don't know. I think Damian Harris is the alpha dog in that backfield. So I think he keeps it until he just absolutely gives it away.
And then Devontae Parker had 8.1 fantasy points. Jalen Waddle had 12.1. He looked good. And we'll be seeing Will Fuller this week, too. I think it goes Jalen Waddle, Will Fuller, Devontae Parker.
I'm going to say Will Fuller takes that number one when he gets back.
Okay.
I think he's crazy good.
And then in my tight end rankings this week, I talked about how much I hate Mike Gesicki as a fantasy player. I have him at tight end 23 this week. He's certainly not playable tight end.
Yeah, too many mouths to feed, and he doesn't play enough.
He didn't even catch a ball. He had 2 targets, didn't even catch a ball. Nelson Aguilar did catch a touchdown with 13.2 fantasy points. Jacoby Myers with 4.4. And then Jonnu Smith had 4.8, and Hunter Henry had 3.1. So, not much to talk about is Patriots receivers. Chiefs versus Browns. Baker Mayfield had 12.6 fantasy points. Patrick Mahomes had 33.2, proving why he was the number 1 QB taken in most drafts. Just an absolute beast. And then Nick Chubb had 53% of snaps. I was kind of surprised when I saw that number. But he had 20 fantasy points.
It's Kareem Hunt. Like Kareem Hunt is a hell of a running back. Like they're both going to get theirs.
I think Nick Chubb is the best pure runner in football.
I think that's a trendy thing to say, and I think it's Derrick Henry.
Well, I mean,
maybe even Cook.
You don't really see Nick Chubb shut down like Derrick Henry did. I mean, Nick Chubb can get involved in the passing game. Nick Chubb, I think Derrick Henry's the better running back. I do, but I think Nick Chubb is the best pure runner.
Yeah, I don't know about that one.
And then
he's up there, but
Kareem Hunt had 14 fantasy points with 47% of snaps. Clyde Edwards-Helaire had 7.2 fantasy points and 72% of snaps. I don't love Clyde. Didn't love him coming into the year. Don't love him.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. He's not going to get the touchdown equity. You're banking on a lot of yards. That's it.
And then David Njoku actually led receiving, but Jarvis Landry had 14.4 fantasy points. I think he ran one in. Yeah, he ran one in. And then Austin Hooper had 2.7. Don't think there's much to talk about there. And then Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce showed why they're so good. 26 fantasy points for Tyreek Hill. Travis Kelce with 19.6.
Mm-hmm.
So Travis Kelce showed why. I didn't love him as a first-round pick this year, but
I think it's worth it. I think it's a good pick if you got him.
And then Justin Fields actually outscored Andy Dalton in fantasy with throwing 2 passes and running once. I think it should be Justin Fields' time. Like Ryan said, get him in there.
He looked good.
I think it
was a small sample, but he looked good.
And then Matthew Stafford looked amazing. 321 yards, 3 touchdowns. David Montgomery also looked good. He had 16 carries for 108 yards and a touchdown, 17.8 fantasy points. He had 59% of the snaps, But I did look before the injury. He had 76% of the snaps. So
Might be a little skewed.
We were arguing about Damian Williams and David Montgomery. I think it is clear that David Montgomery is the workhorse in this offense when healthy, and Damian Williams is only a handcuff.
Okay.
But Darrell Henderson had 94% of snaps. This is going to be the highest snap percentage, I think, all year for him. He only converted it into 14.7 fantasy points. And then Cole Kmet, like you said, looked good with 4.2 fantasy points. Allen Robinson had 3.5 on 6 catches. And then Cooper Kupp had 16.8 fantasy points. Van Jefferson had 14. Robert Woods had 9.4. Tyler Higbee had 6.8. I see Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp back-to-back high-end wide receiver twos.
I agree. And also to touch on your point about Darrell Henderson, I think Sonny Michel will get more involved as he gets more acquainted with the offense.
I could see it more of a 60-40 split.
I could as well. Maybe even a 50-50 because Darrell Henderson is very streaky. So some games he'll go crazy. Some games he'll be very quiet. And it just takes one of them to get Sonny Michel in there and he could have the hot hand. So we'll see.
All right. And then Lamar Jackson had 18 fantasy points. Derek Carr had 24. Tyson Williams had 15.4 fantasy points. Latavius Murray had 8.8. Tyson Williams played 51% of the snaps. Latavius Murray had 31% of the snaps. They released Trenton Cannon today. I know you're a big Le'Veon Bell fan. Those are the only 2 running backs you should own on a fantasy team.
Yeah, but like Latavius, even though he fell in the end zone, he didn't look good.
No, I think he's only a handcuff at this point. I see Tyson Williams being a low end RB2 play. Latavius Murray is a bench. It's a bench player.
I genuinely do think Bell has potential if say if something happens to another one of the running backs, or if they just integrate him right away, just because of his skill set. I think it meshes well with his team. But yeah, I think it's Tyson Williams until further notice.
I do not think Bell should be owned in any leagues unless it's 14 or deeper. So
yeah, he's a flyer.
And then Josh Jacobs had 52% of the snaps, had a weird stat line, 10 carries for 34 yards and 2 touchdowns. He just had no real running room against a good Baltimore defense. And then Kenyon Drake saw 7 fantasy points. And I think he caught 6 balls. 5 balls.
Well, but that's kind of how Josh Jacobs is. Like, he has not been efficient. You're just banking on volume and falling in the end zone.
I don't love Josh Jacobs. I'd be selling high on him.
I would as well. I agree.
So if there's anybody stupid enough to trade for him in your league, do it. And then a little mini week 1, Sammy Watkins, 4 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown, 9.6 fantasy points. And
is it fair
Marquise
to call that
Brown,
underperforming for Sammy Watkins
for week 1? Oh yeah,
for week 1.
I mean, how many week 2 waiver claims has anyone put in for Sammy Watkins in their lifetime? I mean, I can't even count how many times I've done it. Just week 1, Sammy Watkins.
I was expecting like 10 catches for like 200 yards and like 3 touchdowns.
I was fully expecting an 80-yard touchdown.
Yeah. So shame on you, Sammy, for only putting up 96 yards. But
and I thought Marquise Brown looked better than I expected him to. 6 catches for 69 yards and a touchdown, 13.4 fantasy points. That's only a flex play at best. And Mark Andrews, like we were saying, he's touchdown or bust. 3 catches for 20 yards. And then Darren Waller had 19 targets, 16.5 fantasy points. Terrell Owens, Brian Edwards had 4 catches for 81 yards and almost a touchdown. He had all of his targets, it felt like, the fourth quarter.
Tyreek Hill, Henry Ruggs is going to I think he's gonna bounce back.
I do not. I think Henry Ruggs stinks as a fantasy player.
Wow. Bit aggressive. I understand.
I have never owned Henry Ruggs in my life.
He's only played 1 season.
This is his set. We've done two drafts where Henry Ruggs has been drafted. I
I
play
drafted him last
yeah.
year, but I will not be having him anymore. He's got to show it first.
in 50 fantasy leagues. I have not drafted him once.
I had him in 2 last year and none this year. So I saw what I needed to last year and said, nope, no thanks. Darren Waller is getting every single throw.
It looked like it last night, but that'll be it for the week 1 recap. We'll be doing this. It'll be coming out every Wednesday, because we do have to record on Tuesday after the Monday Night Football games. We will not record these at 1:00 in the morning after the Monday Night Football games.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I don't know if there's anything
check out our socials.
To say. Follow all our socials at the FF Fanatics 3 on Twitter, the FFFanatics.com, the Fantasy Fanatics on YouTube. I don't think I'm missing anything else.
That's it. We appreciate y'all for watching, and we'll see you.